Hi everyone, this is Mrs. Feistel. So glad you could join me today. We are going to study other elements of the story for our reading lesson. So our target is you will look at the mood and the author's tone to help you better understand what the book is about. And you will need a post-it note or a notebook and a pencil for this lesson today. Readers want to build a larger understanding or an interpretation of their book. They just don't want to think of one thing, such as the characters. So to make an interpretation, readers try to add up all the parts, all the elements of the story, and this includes the mood and the tone in the story. So what is mood? Mood is the emotion that the readers feel while reading about the subject. So for me, one way I try to keep mood and tone straight is I think about the mood in a restaurant. And you think of the setting and the characters and how that impacts the atmosphere for a person eating, just like the character and the setting impact the mood or atmosphere for a reader in a story. So let's take a look at this video about mood.
Mood is the feeling that you get from a work of literature or art. Another way to describe mood is atmosphere. When you walk into a place, it has an atmosphere that makes you feel a certain way. When you walk into a story, it too has an atmosphere that makes you feel a certain way. The mood of a story can be calm, annoyed, frantic, joyful, gloomy, romantic, hopeful, or tense. How might you describe the mood of this video right now? Sweet and playful, right? How about now? See how the music changes the mood? But authors can't use music in their writing. So what do they use? Word choice, imagery, and setting. Let's look at some examples. Listen to this sentence. The bloodthirsty lion stalked the savannah, hungrily eyeing the helpless creatures around him. Pay attention to the circled words. What mood do they create? Now listen to this sentence. The majestic lion roamed the savannah, proudly gazing at the creatures around him. How has the mood changed? Which words helped create this mood? Good writers pull readers into the world of a story by using vivid language that appeals to the five senses. This imagery is crucial to establishing a mood. See if you can find the imagery in this sentence. The wooden bat slipped in Emily's sweaty palms as she stepped up to home plate, the sun glaring down on her like a harsh spotlight. The crowd's piercing howls and jeers caused her heart to thump in her chest. What mood do these images create? What if the author had written, the wooden bat vibrated with energy in Emily's steady hands as she stepped up to home plate, the sun shining like a golden medal in the sky. The crowd's joyful whoops and whistles caused her heart to do a little dance in her chest. How did the different images change the mood? The setting of a story also plays a big part in creating mood. Like in this scene. What time is it? Tim asked Jacob. All around them, taxicabs honked their horns as hordes of people in suits pushed by on their way into office buildings. What is the setting? What mood does the setting create? Now imagine the same scene, but in a completely different setting. Like this one. What time is it? Tim asked Jacob. Weak moonlight cast shadows over the crumbling gravestones. A lone owl hooted somewhere in the darkness above. How has the setting changed the mood? Remember to think carefully about word choice, imagery, and setting. Good luck.
Now that we have a better idea of what mood is, let's try to practice that when we look at Tiger Rising and how we might come up with the mood after reading a few passages from this book. It was early morning, and it looked like it might rain. It had been raining every day for almost 2 weeks. The sky was gray, and the air was thick and still. Fog was hugging the ground. Rob heard the door to the motel room squeak open. He opened his eyes. The world was dark. The only light came from the falling Kentucky Star. Sistine stood and stared at the unmade beds and the tattered recliner. Her eyes moved over his father's gun case and then went to the macaroni pan from the night before, still sitting on the hot plate. Kate DiCamillo uses a lot of word choice and has a lot of imagery in this, and really helps me to understand or get a feeling what the mood is like in this story. So for me, words like rain, gray, fog, the motel door or room, the door to the room squeaked open. It was dark. The light came from the falling Kentucky Star. And words like unmade, tattered, gun case, a macaroni pan from the night before, still sitting on the hot plate. To me, all of those combined kind of creates that mood of sadness or a gloomy atmosphere that I feel, and really carries on throughout the whole book. Now that we've dabbled a little bit with mood, let's take a look at tone. And tone is the author's or the narrator's attitude toward the audience, the subject, or the characters. So for me, it kind of reminds me of when I was younger and my mom would say, "Hey, don't use that tone with me, young lady." It's just how the author kind of presents or uses the language to give us that kind of attitude about the subject or the characters. So let's take a look at the Brain Pop video on tone. It looks like it will probably review a little bit and tell us some more about mood as well.
That's not a real word. Don't use that tone of voice with me. Dear Tim and Moby, how do I figure out what the tone is in a story? I don't get it. Signed, Tom. Tone is something that helps convey the emotion you should feel when you read or hear a passage. In general, tone reflects how the narrator or author feels about his topic. Often, it means the same as talking about the tone of someone's voice. Someone can sound angry, or frustrated, or exhausted, or happy, or excited. There are tons of tones. In a piece of writing, however, an author conveys these emotions through his words and writing style. For example, you can usually sense a piece's tone by examining the narrator's vocabulary and syntax, the way we put sentences together. Well, let's look at this passage. My eyes were red with rage, and I couldn't keep my feelings in any longer. I slammed my fist down on the table and demanded he give my money back, or else. Thanks. Anyway, we can definitely tell that the tone here is angry. Words like rage, slammed, and demanded tell us how the narrator's feeling. It's important to remember that you can say the same thing in different tones. Just one word can be said in hundreds of ways, each expressing a different tone. Here's an example. Thanks, I mumbled sarcastically, rolling my eyes at him. Thanks, I shrieked, and ran to give him a great big hug. In each case, the writer sets a different tone. In the first example, the tone is, well, sarcastic, like the author describes. What do you think about the second one, Moby? Right. The diction, or style of speaking, and the exclamation points tell us that the tone is enthusiastic or excited. Well, mood is a little different. It's the general atmosphere of a piece of writing and the overall feeling the reader gets from the piece. A mood might be romantic, mysterious, dark, lighthearted. It could be almost anything. The writer creates the mood not only by establishing characters and plot, but by describing the setting. Setting is the physical surrounding in a story or article, where and when it takes place, and what kind of things are in the background. In fact, the setting often reflects the mood without our even realizing it. Let's read this passage. It was cold, rainy, and dark, like always. She sat by herself in an unlit room, counting the raindrops on the window. Yeah, the mood is pretty gloomy. The gloomy surroundings mirror the gloominess of the story. The narrator isn't telling us that in words, like he's not saying it was gloomy, but we get an overall feeling of gloominess when we read the passage. Even though they're often similar, a story's mood can be very different from the tone. Something may have a very serious tone and a silly or comical mood. Okay, let's read this passage. Maria was ready for what she was sure would be the greatest night of her life. Tears leapt to her eyes as she thought of the lonely night she'd spent praying that this moment would finally arrive. With quivering hands, she lifted her pet rabbit, Buster, out of its cage. It twitched its nose inquisitively, but otherwise kept still. It was finally happening. Maria was going to fulfill her dream. She was going to the prom with a bunny on her head. The narrator uses a very somber tone, which makes it seem like Maria is taking herself and her plans very seriously. But the mood is silly and absurd. She's going to the prom with a bunny on her head. Aha! Triple word score! Let's play again when you're in a more pleasant mood.
So we're going to read the passages from this passage from Tiger Rising, and I want you to think about the tone that Sistine and Rob presents to the reader. I'm going to show you what my thoughts are as I'm working through this, and what words help me to determine this tone. It might help you as well. So they ain't sculptures, Rob protested. They're just whittling, that's all. And we got to be quiet because Beauchamp don't want people walking around his land. Is this his land? Sistine asked. Everything's his, said Rob. The motel and these woods. He can't own everything, Sistine argued. Besides, she said, I don't care. He can catch us. He can put us in jail for trespassing. I don't care. Well, if we're in jail, we won't get to see the tiger, said Rob. So at this point, boys and girls, as I look at this, I certainly get a tone that the tone, especially from Sistine, that she's angry, that she's frustrated, she's defiant. She says, I don't care. And then she argues, he can catch us. I don't care. He put us in jail. You know, and it's that repetition, that the way she says, I don't care twice. And so for me, I got the tone, especially from Sistine, that they're both a little angry, they're a little frustrated, defiant. And so we're going to think a little bit more about that as we are reading or listening today to chapter 22 in The Tiger Rising. Chapter 22. You out in the woods with that girl again? His father asked as soon as Rob stepped into the room. Yes, sir, said Rob. Look over here, son. His father was standing by Rob's bed. Sir? Said Rob. His heart sank. He knew what his father had found. The meat. He had hidden it under his bed until it was time to go and feed the tiger again. Where'd this meat come from? His father asked, pointing at the bloody brown bag. Without thinking, Rob said, Beauchamp. Beauchamp, his father repeated low and dark. Beauchamp. He don't hardly pay me enough to get by, and now he's giving us this rotten meat. He thinks I ain't man enough to put meat on my own table? Rob wanted to say something, but then he thought of Beauchamp, and he held his tongue. I ought to teach him a lesson, his father said. The cords in his neck stood out like twigs. He kicked the bag of meat. I ought to, he said, making me work for less than nothing, giving us rotten meat. He went and stood in front of the gun case. He didn't unlock it. He just stood and stared and cracked his knuckles. Daddy, said Rob, but he couldn't think of anything to say after that. His mother had known how to calm his father. She would put her hand on his arm or say his name in a soft and reproachful voice, and that would be enough. But Rob didn't know how to do those things. He stood for a minute more and then he walked over to his bed and grabbed a piece of wood and his knife. As he left the room, his father was still standing at the locked gun case, staring through the glass at the deer hunting rifle, as if he was trying to will the gun into his hands. Rob walked to the Kentucky Star sign. He sat down underneath it and leaned up against one of the cold, damp poles and started to work on the wood. But his head was too full of his father's anger and Sistine's tears. He couldn't concentrate. He looked up at the dark underside of the sign and recalled lying on a blanket, staring up at the big oak tree. His mother had been on one side of him, and his father, asleep and snoring, had been on the other. He remembered that his mother had taken hold of his hand and pointed up at the sun shining through the leaves of the tree and said, "Look, Rob, I have never in my life seen a prettier color of green. Ain't it perfect?" "Yes, ma'am," he said, staring at the leaves. "It looks like the original green, the first one God ever thought up." His mother squeezed his hand hard. "That's right," she said. "The first one God ever thought up. The first ever green. You and me, we see the world the same." He concentrated on that green. He let it seep through a crack in his suitcase of knot thoughts and fill up his head with color. He wondered if Willie Mae's cricket had been the same bright and original green. And that's what he thought about as he carved. And so he wasn't surprised when he stopped and held the wood away from himself to see a wing and a beak and a tiny eye. It was Cricket, Willie Mae's cricket, coming to life under his knife. He worked on the bird for a long time until it looked so real that he half expected it to break into song. When he finally went back to the room, he found his father asleep in the recliner. The gun case was still locked, and the bag of meat was gone. He wouldn't be able to feed the tiger in the morning. He would have to wait until Beauchamp brought him another package. Rob went and stood over his father and stared down at him. He looked at his heavy hands and the bald spot on his nodding head. He was memorizing him and trying at the same time to understand him, to make sense out of his anger and his quiet, comparing it to the way he used to sing and smile when his father jerked awake. "Hey," he said. "Hey," Rob said back. "What time is it?" "I ain't sure," said Rob. "Late, I guess." His father sighed. "Go on and give me that leg medicine." Rob brought him the tube of medicine. Outside the motel room, the world creaked and sighed. The rain started in again, and his father's hands were gentle as he applied the ointment to Rob's legs. Thank you, boys and girls, for listening to today's reading. And today I want you to practice your reading skills. I want you to really think about the tone and attitude in your story. So here's your assignment for today. I want you to read your independent book and continue to work on becoming a stronger reader. And as you're reading today, think about the emotion you feel throughout the book. What's the author's tone or attitude toward various subjects or characters in the book you are reading? And what is the mood? Find evidence in your book to support your thoughts. It's very important, boys and girls, that you take the time to do this. Write them down either in your reader's notebook or on a Post-it note. And I thank you so much for your time today, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.